He made treaties with the chief of Uzigua. He made a treaty with the chief of Ukami and Guru, Nguru. So he made those treaties with the chiefs. And remember, you are from one work, for you to get a pass into the interior, you had to consult with the Sultan. The Sultan would give you introductory letters. So initially, Sir Harry Johnson was given introductory letters by the Sultan. But now, because the Germans were competing against the British, so Karl Peters came and made those territories with the chiefs that I've already mentioned. That is the chief of Uzigua, the chief of Usaga, the chief of Ukami, and the chief of Guru, without consulting Sultan. So this brought about some problems because Sultan did not allow or had not given the Germans the go ahead. So this brought about some struggles between the British and the Germans. So when Karl Peters went back to Germany, the Chancellor acknowledged the treaties that he had made with the African chiefs. On the other hand, Sir Harry Johnson, the British did not back him up. So there was a kind of a struggle in between them. So this led to a conflict. And in 1886, there was an agreement they had to do because they had agreed in the Berlin Conference to have an amicable way of solving issues. So they made the first agreement, which we are going to refer to as the that was referred to as the Anglo-German Treaty, which was made in 1886. This was made between the British and the Germans, and these were the terms of that treaty. The first one, the Sultan. Remember, now we have these three groups that are warring or are competing against each other. The Sultan is controlling the coast. Remember, this is an Arab. He's controlling the coast, and he has been having the rights of introducing people into the interior. So he still wants to control the coast. And then we have Karl Peters representing the Germans, and then we have the British also coming into the picture. So that conflict resulted to them signing the Anglo-German Treaty, or the first treaty that was referred to as the Anglo-German Treaty. So the first term was that the Sultan of Zanzibar. So we are looking at the terms of that treaty. So the first one is that the Sultan was to be left with the 16-kilometer or the 10-mile, which is equal to 10-mile coastal strip. So the Sultan was to be left with that strip, and then also he was given the offshore streets. The Sultan was also to take control. Sultan was also take control of the islands, of Pate, Zanzibar, the islands of Pate, Zanzibar, and also Mafia, Pemba, and Lamu. Mafia, Pemba, and Lamu. So the Sultan was, apart from being given this stripe at the coast, or the strip at the coast, he was also to take control of the islands of Zanzibar, Pate, Mafia, Pemba, and Lamu. That was the second term. The third one, Germany was to get the territory between River Umba and River Ruvuma. River Umba and River Ruvuma. So Germany was given that strip or that territory between River Umba, that is at the coast, and also River Ruvuma. And then it was also given the coastline of Witu. It was also given the coastline of Witu was given to the Germans. And then lastly, Germany or Britain got the territory. Britain got the territory from River Umba going northwards, was to get between River Umba up to River Juba, that is in the along the Somali coast, that is towards the north. So those are Juba, those are the terms that they agreed upon. So each or the East African coast, you could go and get a map so that you can able to get from your maps, you will be able to see specifically where are these positions on the map that they agreed upon. So those are the terms that they agreed upon. So as you can notice, this was just along the East African coast. But now, towards the interior, it was left hanging. There was no agreement on how they are going to be sharing. So the north or the interior of East Africa was left hanging. So that was another cause of conflict. Immediately after they have agreed, going forward, companies were instituted to make sure that the interest of the Germans and the interest of the British are taken care of. The British contracted or got the services of the Imperial British East African Company to take these or to take control of the territory that they had been given. On the other hand, the Germans got the services of the German East African Company, which was led by Karl Peters at that time. So these companies were given the responsibility of getting more territory and administering the territories that they had been given. So that led to more conflicts. So in the interior, as they took or as they continued to expand, Karl Peters was the first to reach to Uganda, and he made a treaty or made an agreement with Kabaka to protect him. So by the time the British were coming towards the interior, and remember I said the British were so much concerned with protecting the source of River Nile. So by the time they were coming to get this territory, it had the Germans had already made an agreement with Kabaka, so they could not be able to get that territory. So that brought about another conflict between the Germans and the British, which necessitated another treaty to be signed. So they signed another treaty that was referred to as the second Anglo-German treaty, which was also referred to as Heligoland Treaty. This was signed in 1890. It was signed in 1890. So this was also to bring a time of peace between the Germans and the British. So these are the agreements that they made, or the terms that they made. The first one, Uganda was left. Uganda was recognized as a British sphere of influence. Uganda was recognized as a British sphere of influence, and then Germany agreed to abandon her claim over her territory of Witu. She also accepted British protectorate over Ireland. So Germany abandoned Witu, or the territory of Witu, and also recognized that the British were to take over the islands of Zanzibar and the island of Pemba. And then Germans got the Heligoland. Heligoland that was very influential. And then the Sultan was left with the 10-mile strip, and then the western boundary of Uganda and Tanganyika, and not Tanganyika, of Uganda and Tanganyika were defined. And then lastly, German took possession of part of Lake Tanganyika, from the British at a cost. So these conflicts were the events that led to Kenya becoming a protectorate. So with these agreements, Uganda becoming part of being declared the British sphere of influence. Now the British could control the whole area from the coast, almost 300 kilometers inside, right, up to Uganda. Now that became part of the British sphere of influence, and finally they came, or it was declared the British protectorate. So those are the events that led to Kenya becoming a colony, or becoming a colony of British. So you could go and get some more literature. You can read in your KLB. There is more literature on that explaining more, but I just needed you to get these specific terms of the agreements that were made between the British and the Germans in acquiring the Kenyan territory. So as we end our lesson today, could you be able to attempt these revision question? And the question is, identify the terms of the agreements made by the British and the Germans. Identify the terms of the agreements made by the British and the Germans. So that is the question I want you to attempt. And now you should be able to differentiate. That is the Anglo-German Treaty of 1886 and the Second Anglo-German Treaty, or which is also known as the Heligoland Treaty of 1890. And with that, I'm sure you have learned quite a new thing today, and I hope you have enjoyed the lesson today. It's bye-bye from me.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
Hello learners, my name is Stephen Kariungi, a biology teacher, and I'm going to take you through a Form 3 topic, and that is reproduction in plants and animals. First of all, before we go on with the topic, it is important to understand what are the objectives of this topic. What are the requirements by the examiners as far as reproduction in plants and animals is concerned? So let us look at the chapter objectives. Now, the first objective, we need to understand the meaning of the term reproduction. We need to understand the meaning and types of reproduction that we have. The other objective that we need to fulfill is to be able to differentiate mitosis and meiosis. These are the two types of cell division that we have. And we say that cell division is the basis of reproduction. So for reproduction to take place, cells need to divide. So we need to understand the different types of cell division. We also need to describe the importance of reproduction. On this, we are asking ourselves, why is reproduction important? Why is reproduction important to plants and animals? And then from there, we need to get now into the details about reproduction in plants. And in this case, we need to describe the structure and function of the flower. Describe the structure and function of the flower, because the flower is the reproductive organ in a plant. So basically, we will not look at the leaves, the stem, and the roots. No. We will only concentrate ourselves on the flower, because it's the part of the plant that take part in reproduction. Chapter objective number 5 is to be able to describe pollination and the agents of pollination. So we need to understand how does pollination occur and what are the various agents that are used in pollination. And then finally, on plants, we need to describe the modes of seed and fruit dispersal. We need to understand the modes of seed and fruit dispersal. So that will be the end of the objectives as far as the plants are concerned. As a continuation of the same, we will continue with the animals. And the first thing about the animals, we need to differentiate. We need to differentiate between internal and external fertilization. We need to differentiate between internal and external fertilization. That is in animals. Then we continue with the same, and we shall describe the structure and function of the mammalian reproductive system. So we shall describe the structure and function of the mammalian reproductive system, whereby we shall use human beings as an example. Objective number 5 will be to discuss the role of hormones in human reproduction. And then finally, no, second from last, we will also discuss the sexually transmitted infections, what we call the STIs. And then finally, we will discuss the advantages and disadvantages of sexual and asexual reproduction. So those will be our objectives. So the first chapter objective is to understand the meaning and the types of reproduction. Number 2, to differentiate between mitosis and meiosis. These are the two types of cell division. Then number 3, describe the importance of reproduction. How is reproduction important in our life? Number 4, describe the structure and function of the flower. Remember, the flower is the reproductive organ in plants. Describe pollination and agents of pollination. We look at that. Describe the modes of seed and fruit dispersal. Now, from animals, we shall start from objective number 7, whereby we shall differentiate between internal and external fertilization. Then we shall describe the structure and function of the mammalian reproductive system. We shall look at the role of hormones in human reproduction. We shall also discuss the sexually transmitted infections in humans. And then finally, we shall discuss the advantages and disadvantages of sexual and asexual reproduction. So that is a summary of the chapter objectives that we shall go through in this particular topic. So for now, I want us to embark on an introduction. And in this introduction, we want to understand the first objective, and that is the meaning of reproduction. And we can say that reproduction, which is one of the characteristics of living organisms, is the ability of mature organisms, the ability by mature organisms to give rise to offspring of their own kind. So in this case, if you are talking about, for example, human beings, are the human beings mature and able to give rise to offsprings of their own kind? That is reproduction. So you can say that is the ability by mature organisms to give rise to offspring of their own kind. Of their own kind or of their own species. Now, having understood that, the next thing that we shall look at is which are the two types of reproduction. Types of reproduction. And the types of reproduction, there are two. One, there is what you call sexual reproduction, and there is asexual reproduction. So we'll go through each one of them and discuss sexual reproduction, and then after that we shall discuss asexual reproduction. Now, sexual reproduction is the type of reproduction that involves the gametes. Gametes are sex cells. In this case, what happens is that during sexual reproduction, the male gametes fuse with the female gametes to form a zygote. And the process involved is called fertilization. So, to start with that, so it involves the fusion. Fusion is the joining together of the male and the female gametes to form a zygote. And the process whereby the male nucleus fuses with the female nucleus is referred to as fertilization. So we can say that so that process we refer to it as fertilization. So basically we can say that sexual reproduction involves fertilization. It involves the fusion of the male nucleus and the female nucleus. We shall look at what is the male nucleus in different organisms, possibly in plants, in animals, and then we can be able to see and understand how fertilization occurs. The next type of reproduction is the asexual reproduction. And this type of reproduction does not involve the use of gametes. What it does, this is whereby mature organisms give rise to offspring of their own kind without involving fertilization. So we can have, this is where mature organisms without the use of gametes, or we can say without fertilization. So we shall later look at the different modes of asexual reproduction in different organisms. But basically is where a mature organism will give rise to another organism of its own kind, but without involving the use of gametes or without any fertilization involved. So basically in asexual reproduction, it's only one organism that is involved. But in the case of sexual reproduction, there are two organisms that are involved, because one produces the male gametes and the other one produces the female gametes. So we look at these in much more details as we have done. So basically for today, we have gone through the objectives of the entire chapter, what we shall be expected to learn. And then we have also introduced the meaning of the term reproduction, which is a characteristic of all living organisms. And we have stated that it's the ability by mature organisms to give rise to offspring of their own kind or of their own species. Then we have gone ahead and looked at two types of reproduction, that is sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. We have gone ahead and explained that sexual reproduction involves the fusion of the male and the female gametes to form a zygote. And I've explained that gametes are sex cells. We shall look at those sex cells in more details much later. Then the process by which the male nucleus, the nucleus of the male gamete, fuses with the female nucleus is called fertilization. Then in the second type of reproduction, that is asexual, we have mature organisms giving rise to organisms of their own kind without the use of gametes or without fertilization. And also, we shall look at it in more details as we go into other sub topics within this particular chapter. So we are going to stop there for now, and we shall have an assignment based on what we have learned. So we'll have two questions for a start, being the beginning of the topic. The first question, explain the meaning of reproduction. Explain the meaning of the term reproduction. Number two, state and explain the two types of reproduction in living organisms. So those are the two questions for the day. So you're going to stop there. See you next time.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
How do you do? It's my hope that you are faring on well. Welcome to our today's history and government lesson. It's Form 3 topic that we are going to be tackling in our today's lesson, that is establishment of colonial rule in Kenya. That is the topic that we have been handling. And in our today's lesson, we are going to be studying the company rule in Kenya. That is how, or after the partitioning of Africa, which we learned in our previous lesson of East Africa, East Africa, Britain got her territory, which he declared to be the British East African or the British East African Protectorate, which she decided to administer, and to administer that territory, companies were used. So the company of the imperial British East African Company was used to administer the territory that had been acquired by the Britain. So this one is abbreviated as IBEACO. That is the Imperial British East African Company. So this is the company that was given the charter. The company was given the charter to administer. They were given the charter to administer the protectorate, or Kenya, on behalf of British government. They were given this one should be a small letter, on behalf of the British government, because it would be so much costly for the government to administer the protectorate on directly. So the company, the Imperial British East African Company, was given the charter, or was given the power to administer or manage Kenya, or the British protectorate, on behalf of the of the British government. So the rights were given to this company to do everything on behalf of the government. This happened in 1888. That is when the company was given the rights, or the charter, to administer the British protectorate on behalf of the British. So immediately the company got that charter, it leased out the land to the interior to Sultan, so that it leased the land from Sultan, so that they could advance, or they could invest, or make profits. Remember, this is a company that has been given that territory, so they are using it for their own economic importance. So let us first discuss the aims of IBEA, or the aims of the Imperial British East African Company. What were the goals? What did they need? Why was it important for them to get this territory and to administer that territory? The first one, they were to maintain law and order. They were supposed to maintain law and order. That was their first aim, or their first goal. They were supposed to maintain law and order in the territory. So they their mandate was to make sure that the territory that was declared a German sphere of influence. Remember, during the Berlin Conference, one of the terms of that conference, or the Berlin Conference, was that a company that had declared a sphere of influence had to follow that declaration with effective occupation. Effective occupation. So they had to effectively occupy. What does it mean to effectively occupy? There had to be law and order in that territory. So the first order of business of the Imperial British East African Company was to maintain law and order. And then number two, they were to counter. It was to counter the influence of the French, the Germans, and Italy, who are also interested in this area. So the Imperial British East African Company was given the role or the mandate of countering the influence of the Germans, especially, who are the biggest rivals in this area to the British. So the other aim or the other goal for them was to counter the spread or the influence of those countries. Number three, they were to control and develop trade. They were to control and develop trade and trading activities. They had to make sure that there was effective trade activities in that area. The communities, or they were able to exploit the resources. They were able to get control of the trading activities in the territory. That was the next aim. The fourth one, that is number 4, they were to collect. They were supposed to levy, not just collect. They were supposed to levy. Allow me to wrap that. They were supposed to levy and collect taxes on the territory. That was the next work of the Imperial British East African Company, or the next aim or goal of the company. They were supposed to levy, that is, to apportion the taxes that are required, and then number 2, to collect those taxes for the benefit or for the influence of the company. And then lastly, they were supposed to advocate for the end of slave trade. They were supposed to abolish slave trade in that territory. They were supposed to make sure that the slave trade that had started happening, that was led by the Sultan at the coast, has now been avoided, or had now been brought to an end. So those were the aims of this company as it occupied the territory of Kenya. Remember, Britain is occupying this land. They have made an agreement as nations, but as a government, they are not able to come and occupy that land physically. So they use this company to control the territory. So those were the aims. Now, as they were making these, as they were controlling and exercising their authority over this territory, they had several achievements. Now, that is the next thing we are going to look at, the achievements. The achievements of Imperial British East African Company. The achievements of Imperial British East African Company. So the first one is that they were able to suppress. They were able to suppress the revolts by traditional communities. They were able to suppress the revolts by traditional communities. So as they took control or took authority in those territories, most African communities did not accept. So they had to stand up against them, but they managed to quench or bring an end to those rebellions. Number two, they laid a foundation. The company laid a foundation. They laid a foundation for the coming of the colonial administration. So they laid structures that later could come and be used by the British government during the direct control. And then number three, they freed many slaves. Freed slaves. They freed slaves. So as we mentioned, they had to advocate for the end of slave trade. That was an aim, or that was a need that they had to be able to accomplish. So they freed a lot of slaves who are enslaved, especially at the coast. And these brought most of the people back to their homes. Apart from that, they started construction of roads. Construction of roads along the trade routes. The trade routes where the trading activities were happening. These they expanded by creating roads or constructing roads. They financed the construction of roads. So these enabled or made way for the government later on, the colonial administrators, to come and use the same roads or advance the same roads as during the time of occupation. And then lastly, they started early industries. They started early industries. As remember, they had to undertake trading activities. So in their trade, they had to start industries. For example, the weaving, the textile industry was initiated by this company. So to make sure that the cotton that was being grown was now being put into place. So the earliest industries were set up by the Imperial British East African Company. So those are some of the achievements that were able to be acquired by the company that was acting on behalf of the British government. So even with those achievements, the Imperial British East African Company made a lot of significant influence because they effectively occupied this land, this territory of Kenya. It was effectively occupied and led by the Imperial British East African Company. So they made several forts or centers of administration. That is another, you could also mention another influence or another impact made by the British East African Company. So they made forts. They made forts, which were also referred to as bombers, at different areas where they could store trade commodities, where they could live. So these forts included, they had made one at Kismayu. They also made another one at Malindi. another one was made at Vanga, another one was made at Witu, another one was made at Machakos, another one was made at Fort Smith, and lastly, there was a fort in Mumias. So these are administrative centers that were created by the Imperial British East African Company. So these ensured that they could easily control, or they could easily manage the territory. Yes, despite of them making those achievements, they also encountered some problems. So they had problems. So the problems faced by Imperial British East African Company. What are these problems that they faced in establishing their control? The first one is that they did not have enough manpower. They did not have manpower. They did not have enough manpower. They did not have enough leaders to effectively control or to carry out their activities or their objectives. So that was a very significant problem or challenge that they had faced. And then most Africans were resistance. Most of the African communities resisted the advancement or the work of the Imperial British East Africa. So there were frequent revolts, and for them to quench, or for the British or for the company to quench this resistance, they required a lot of resources. They had to invest a lot of money to quench those rebellions. That was very costly on their land. And also, the land was too big. The land was too vast. So you can imagine, from the coast towards the interior, the Imperial British East Africa was responsible for both Kenya and Uganda, right? And part of Somali. So that was a very huge chunk of land to be managed by one company. So that was another challenge. And then there was poor transport system. Poor transport. There were no elaborate road system. They did not have established roads where they could move on every now and then. And then also, they did not have navigable rivers. They did not have navigable. There were no navigable rivers that could ease the movement of, or the carrying of trade items. So that required them carrying or employing a lot of laborers to transport their commodities. And then there was low trading activities. There were low trading activities between the people of the coast and the people of the interior. So the trade volume was very low. So that meant that they did not make as higher profits as they had anticipated. That was a problem or a challenge on their side. And then lastly, the last problem that they faced was that it was so expensive. It was very expensive. It was very expensive to maintain the territory. It was very expensive to maintain the territory, and all the administrative centers they had created, they needed a lot of leaders, they needed a lot of administrators in this territory who were supposed to be paid. So that became very expensive on the side or on the part of the company. So these brought or encouraged the British government to finally come and establish their own control. The company could no longer be able to effectively manage or handle the territory, which forced the British government to send down its own leaders or leaders to come and take control of the territory. So that is the company rule in Kenya. They have we have mentioned that in the British East African Protectorate, it was led by the Imperial British East African Company, and we have looked at the aims of that company, what achievements they made, and then lastly we have looked at the problems that they had faced. So as we end our lesson today, allow me to give you rub here and give you an assignment. Give you an assignment. Revision question. Revision questions. Number 1. Name the company that administered the British Number 2, what were the aims of Ibeco? And then lastly, explain the challenges faced by Imperial British East African Company. So the first question is, name the company that administered the British East African Protectorate. And then number 2, what were the aims of the Imperial British East African Company? And lastly, explain the challenges faced by Imperial British East African Company. Those are the questions I want you to attempt and answer them. So write them down and also write your answers effectively, and then check whether you have been able to grasp what we have learned today. And that brings us to the end of our history and government lesson for today. Bye bye until the next time.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
Hello, Lana. Welcome to a lesson in history and government. We are going to have a topic in Form 3 work, which is European invasion in Africa and the process of colonization. In our previous lessons, we have been studying the Africans' reaction to the European invasion or European colonization. we have looked at the resistance, and now in our last lesson we looked at the Baganda collaboration. So in our today's lesson, my dear learner, we are going to dive deep into how the Lozi collaborated with the British. So when you talk of the Lozi, this is a community that is found in South Africa. It is a community that is found in South Africa, where we are in, actually not South Africa, southern. When we talk of South Africa, that is a nation. So it is in the southern part, the southern Africa. Southern Africa. Southern Africa, what we refer to the modern day Zambia. So that is where this community were living. They had a leader or a king who was known as Lewanika. Lewanika was their king at that time. So with the advance of the British from the south, remember the first place the British settled was in South Africa. So they started advancing northwards. So the British were the ones with whom Lewanyika decided to make a collaboration with. So the people of Lozi, led by their king Lewanyika, decided to collaborate or cooperate with the British. Let us look at the reasons why they decided to collaborate. The reasons why they decided to, reasons for Lewanikas. Remember, Lewanika as a king was acting on behalf of the Lozi people. So reasons for Lewanika's collaboration. Reasons for Lewanika's collaboration. So why did he decide to collaborate? Remember, these started to happen at around 1916. Let me mention here. This started to happen at around 1916 when he met the Christian missionaries who encouraged him to seek protection or seek a time to be cooperate with the British. So this is the time when it started. So in consultation with the council, his own traditional council, Lewanika decided to collaborate with the British. So the first reason that he collaborated or that made him to collaborate with the British was to seek protection. He wanted to seek protection. He was constantly being raided by the Dembele. And I'm sure you remember this community, Dembele. He was constantly being attacked or raided by the Dembele. So he wanted to be protected from these raids or be helped by the British to be able to fight off the Dembele raids that were really constant upon their land. So the main reason why he collaborated was for his own protection. He wanted to shield or cushion his kingdom from these constant attacks. That is the first reason. Also, he needed to gain material gain. For material gain, he needed material gain. Material gain. The British had goods, manufactured goods that he could not have in his motherland. So the British brought about weapons. The British brought clothing, right? glassware, among many other attractive goods. So Lewanyika wanted to benefit from the British, because with cooperation, the British would be willing to exchange their goods with the people. Also, another reason why my dear Lana, he was really interested in cooperating with the British was to get Western civilization. Western civilization. What does that mean? He wanted to get the education of the white man. Remember the language, the British are speaking English, right? So the kingdom or Lewanyika wanted to have a new language, the system of education where people could learn to read, learn to write, and learn to communicate in this language, right? So that was another reason. Also, he wanted to benefit from the medicine that they had brought. So the British had to build hospitals. Now, with the British or with the Western medicine, the diseases that had for a very long time in the kingdom did not have a way of medication. The white man was able to provide medicine. For example, malaria. The white man was able to discover medicine to cure such diseases. So it was to a plus for the people of the Lozi or the Lozi to have the British alongside them or in their corner. These would make sure that they have a very good life. And then he feared. Another reason why he collaborated, he feared the consequences. He feared the consequences of resistance. So he had heard how the communities who had resisted European occupation, what had happened to them. So he did not want to let his people undergo that kind of suffering. He wanted to have his people safe. So he wanted an easy way out for his people. He did not want to incur the cost of mounting a resistance. That was another reason. And then another reason why probably Lewanyika decided to collaborate, he wanted to secure his position. He wanted to secure his position as king. So with the British helping him administer the kingdom, Lewanyika's position would be secure. Nobody could come and overthrow him. And as we are going to discuss as we look at the process of collaboration, there were some revolts against the king before the British came. So the British coming was a kind of a cure or kind of very welcome by Lewanyika, because he wanted to solidify his position as the king. And also he was influenced by Kama. Who was the Kama who was leading the Ngwato. These were people in Botswana. So Kama, that is the leader of the Ngwato, had had previous encounters with the British. So when the British came and approached Lewanyika to come and have an alliance or collaborate with them, Lewanyika sent a message to Khama asking him, is it okay if I work with these people? And Khama answered to the affirmative. So he encouraged or he pushed Lewanyika into having this collaboration continue to take place. And then lastly, he wanted to maintain the independence. He wanted to maintain the independence of his kingdom. So in his mind, when he was collaborating with them, he had the idea that his people would be left to have their independence, to continue having a time or leading themselves as they had wished. So making an alliance or making a collaboration with the British, he saw that that would have been a good step to making sure that his kingdom was safe. So these are some of the reasons why Lewanyika decided to collaborate with the British. Now, my dear learner, let us look at the process. What took place? How did he collaborate with the British? So let us look at the process of collaboration. The process of collaboration. So, in 1885, Lewanyika, right? And I want you to note this. It is Lewanyika, not Lewanyika. It is Lewanyika. Came into close contact with Francois, right? He came into close contact with Francois, a British, who encouraged him to make or to seek protection. So he told him to seek protection from the British. So these white men encouraged him to write a letter to Britain asking for them to come and protect him. So Francois helped Lewanyika. Remember, Lewanyika had not learned initially, did not know how to read and write. But with the help of Francois, right, he was able to write a letter to Britain asking them to come and protect him. So with that, they made the first, in response, they made the first treaty. They made the first treaty, which was known as Lewanyika Ware Treaty. Lewanyika Ware Treaty. So this treaty was made between Harry Ware. This was a British who was known as Harry Ware with Lewanyika, right? Lewanyika. So these white men, on behalf of the British, made a treaty with Lewanyika. And in that treaty, he allowed the British to have mining prospects, right? He allowed mining prospects for the British in the kingdom of the Lozi, except the specific place where the Lozi were living, that was known as the Barote land, right? The Barotse land where the Lozi were living, they were not allowed. They could mine elsewhere within the kingdom of the Lozi. That means the places where Lewanika had previously occupied, but the Lozi did not live there. So he allowed the British mining prospects in those lands except the land where the Lozi were living. So this land is where the Lozi were living. This tribe of the Lozi, where the king had come from. So they were allowed to mine everywhere else except this land. So that was the treaty they made with Hari Ware. So apart from that treaty, there was another treaty, the second one that they made. The second one that they made, it was with Lewanika. Lochna Treaty. So when this first treaty was made between Hari Ware and Lewanika gave him mining prospects, he sold these prospects to two other mine prospectors, who in turn also sold the prospects or the right. When you talk of prospects, is a right to do something. So when he sold those rights, today we might refer to them as patents, right? That is a patent. That this is somebody who made, for example, this whiteboard marker has a patent for this brand, right? So at that time, if for you to take mining or for you to have a mining contract, you had to have the rights to take or to do mining there. So Hari Ware sold the rights to two other prospectors of mining, who in turn sold to Cecil Rhodes. And I'm sure we have mentioned him, Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes, who was leading the British South African Company. I want you to remember that, British South African Company. So while he was leading this, he, together with somebody else who was known as Frederick Lochner, decided to come and make a further agreement with Lewanika. So this person, Frederick Lochner, was given powers by Cecil Rhodes, who was the head at that time of the British South African Company. He came to this land, the Lozi land, to come and continue to make treaties. And they made a treaty with Lewanika. Among the terms that they agreed on was that Lewanika would get an annual payment of £2,000 each and every year. And then the British were supposed to be given exclusive mining rights or mining rights in that area. And then which was being led by the company, British South African Company. We discussed in our previous lessons that these companies were acting on behalf of the British government. They were companies that had been given charters. They had been given an allowance. They had been allowed to continue working in these territories so that they could ease the cost for the British government. And then apart from that, they were supposed to allow a British resident. They were supposed to allow a British resident to continue living in the kingdom so that he could look after the interests. He could look after the interests of the British in that area. Then apart from that, there was a last treaty that they made, which we refer to as the Lowry Treaty. The Lowry Treaty. This was also made to make sure that the interests of the British have been taken care of in that kingdom. So in the Lozi Kingdom, majority of the collaboration that Lewanika made was in terms of treaties. This treaty that we have just mentioned was built on the previous one. It was just to affirm the terms that they had agreed on. So with these treaties, Lewanika slowly signed off his kingdom to leadership by the British, and finally he found himself having to be ruled or having to be governed by the British. So this, though he was trying to protect himself, yes, there was no armed struggle, but to the very end of it, he found out that the kingdom had been colonized, or the kingdom was now being ruled by the British. So, my dear Lana, those are some of the, or a way in which, just a brief summary of how the Lozi, led by Lewanika, collaborated with the British. So, my dear Lana, as we come to the end of our lesson today, I want to give you a revision quiz. 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 And the question I want you to attempt is identify the reasons for Lewanika's collaboration. And then number 2, outline the treaties that were made by Lewanika with the British. Identify the treaties that were, or outline the treaties of collaboration. So with that, I'm sure, my dear Lana, you are able to effectively answer those questions. And in case you are having questions on our tab after our screen, you are going to have, you see a comment section. You could ask questions, and then we shall get back to help you have a better understanding, or an in-depth understanding of what we have learned. So in case you are having a question, you could go to the comment section and ask the question, and then we are going to get back to you. And that brings us to the end of our lesson today. It's bye-bye.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
Hello and welcome to our today's lesson, History and Government. We are learning about the establishment of colonial rule in Kenya. That is the topic that we are learning, and we been learning about the Kenyan society's response to the process of colonization by the British. And just as a matter of remembrance and overview of what we have already covered, is that we mentioned that the European, or the Kenyan communities reacted in different ways towards the invasion by the British in their territories. What are these ways? Which are these responses that the Kenyan communities instituted against or towards the British? Are you able to remember them? We said there are three ways in which, or there were three responses that the Kenyan communities responded to the process of European colonization in Kenya. What are these three ways? He said, number one, they resisted. There was resistance. They came up in arms against the British occupying their land. Some of the communities that resisted include what? The one that we are studying, that is the Nandi. Which are the other communities that resisted? We mentioned that in our introductory lesson. We said the other one is the Agriama. We also mentioned the Bukusu and the Somali. Apart from resistance, which was the other method? We said number one, we have resistance. Number two, which is the other response that the Kenyans gave towards the British. The other one was collaboration. Very good. They collaborated or cooperated or accepted the rule in exchange of protection and other things. And there are two communities that collaborated with the British in Kenya. That is the Maasai and the Wanga. That is in among the Western Bantus. Also, there was a third response which we classified or which we called the mixed reaction or mixed response. That is, portion of the community was collaborating with the British while the other was resisting, or initially they collaborated and later on decided to resist. An example are the Agikuyu. So those are the responses, and that is what we are tackling. But now in our today's lesson, and under the Nandi resistance, in our previous lesson, we looked at the factors or the reasons why the Nandi resisted the British rule, and we mentioned and discussed them in detail. And then in our last lesson, we also discussed the cause, how they fought, what initiated the war, how they fought against the British, and the expeditions that were sent by the British against the Nandi. And we also outlined and discussed the reasons, the factors that made the Nandi to put up a prolonged resistance. Remember, we said they started their resistance in 1895, and that resistance lasted up to 1905 when they were finally defeated by the British. So we mentioned the reasons why they put up such a prolonged resistance. Are you able to remember the reasons why they resisted for quite a long time? The reasons included the terrain that they were living in. The mountainous terrain was well known to the Nandi warriors, but the British, who had come with their weapons that needed to be moved around, could not adapt to that terrain. So the terrain encouraged them to use guerrilla warfare. They could attack, then go and hide in the mountains and the hills, so the British could not advance against them. Apart from that, they had a sense of pride. They were not easily going to give up to foreigners coming to take up their land. Apart from that, they had a very strong and able leadership that was provided by the institution of the Orkoyot. And the Orkoyot at that time was Koitalel Arab Samoei. Should remember that. So this man provided direction. He organized the army. He organized the community to fight against the British. Which other factors enabled or led to the Nandi putting up a very strong resistance or a prolonged resistance for quite some while? The other one was military experience. They were able, or they had been involved in other kinds of war with their neighbors. So these enabled them to continue fighting, and they had amassed a lot of experience. Their warriors were experienced to fight because that was a norm to them. They could raid their neighbors at will. They could raid the Gusi, they could raid the Luo, they could raid the Nandi, the Maasai, because they were quite a strong a strong people, and they were well trained. Apart from that, they had a very large army, a very large supply of army, that each and every time they were men who were ready to fight on behalf of the community. Also, they had a steady supply of food, such that even when the British employed the strategy of scorched earth policy, that is the burning down of the crops of the Nandi and killing some of the animals, because of the vast nature of the livelihood or the economic strength of the Nandi, they were able to have a steady supply of food. So their warriors were well fed and they were strong. And then finally, we also discussed the impact of the climate on the British. They could not be able to sustain, or they could not be able to fight effectively, because the climate in the highlands was quite cold, and they could not be able to resist the diseases, the tropical diseases that attacked them. So those are some of the reasons why the Nandi were able to give such a prolonged resistance. So in our today's lesson, we are going forward to learn what are the factors or the reasons that led to them being defeated. The factors that led to them being defeated, that is one. And then number two, the results of their resistance against the British. So allow me to start with the first part, which is reasons, or you can refer to that as factors for their defeat. And when you talk of their defeat, let me write the Nandi, right? The Nandi defeat. Why were they defeated? The factors that contributed to them being defeated. The first one is that some African communities supported the British. An example are the Maasai that were conscripted by the British, and they helped the British to fight against the Nandi. Remember, the Maasai were traditional rivals of the Nandi. The Nandi constantly raided the Maasai community. So with that hatred, the Maasai joined up together with the British to fight against the Nandi. So that contributed to the Nandi being defeated. Actually, this happened in 1905. You should not forget that. So apart from the Maasai, we also had the Somali. That also took part in helping the British to fight against the Nandi. Even as such, other communities around the Nandi did not come to support the Nandi to fight against the British. An example is the Luya community. It did not come to aid or support the Nandi as they fought against the British. That is the first reason. Some African communities supported the British, while other communities, did not come to support the Nandi. So you can imagine, if other communities could join in arms together with the Nandi, they could have easily defeated the British. But now, because that was not the case, that brought them to, it resulted to them being defeated. Then the other reason, or the other factor, was the British had superior weapons. The British had superior weapons. The Africans, or the Nandi, were using rudimentary arms. They used arrows, they used daggers, they were using spears, as opposed to the British, who are having rifles. and machine guns. The Nandi were using spears. They were using arrows. So they did not, they are comparing between a spear and a gun or a machine gun. Which one is likely to outdo the other? That is why the Nandi ultimately were defeated, because the armies or the British army had superior weapons compared to those of the Africans. The Africans had not amassed the technology of creating guns. Remember, even as we are talking during this period, there were no industries of producing arms in the Kenyan territory. So that made a contribution towards the Nandi being defeated by the British. Apart from the superior weapons that they had, there were natural calamities. There were natural calamities. There were natural calamities that influenced or made them to be defeated. An example is the reindeer pest. The reindeer pest is the reindeer pest that attacked their animals and led to most of the animals dying, thus making them to lack food. So when they were attacked by this pest, they were unable to sustain their economy. They were also attacked by smallpox. Smallpox. This is a disease that they did not have initially. So when they were attacked by this disease, it weakened most of them, and most of the warriors were affected. They could not effectively fight. So the natural calamities that came, this is not a result of the British. It was just a natural occurrence that really affected them, and it interfered with their way of fighting or with their way of going against the British. Let us take a step further and look what are the other factors. Number 4, the next factor, number 4, is the British used the scorched. The British used the scorched earth policy. This is where, or this involves the British going to, or after they have attacked the Nandi at one place, they could come down and burn down. They could burn and destroy the crops and the animals that had been left by the Nandi while they were running away. Remember, the Nandi were using the guerrilla warfare. They would come and attack the British and then run away from their homes to go and hide in the mountains, to go and hide in the forest. So they left their homes unattended to. So when the British came together with their collaborators, they would burn down. They would burn down their crops. They would destroy their silos. They would destroy their granaries. So when the Nandi came back, they were unable to get food. So the scorched earth policy, to some extent, also contributed to weakening the defense or the resistance by the Nandi, and ultimately they were defeated. And then lastly, or the last factor that made them to be defeated, was the death of Koitalel Arab Samoei. The death of Koitalel Arab Samoei. So this was the leader, or the Orkoyot. He was the Orkoyot at that time. And remember, the Orkoyot was a very essential person in the Nandi community. He was the overall leader. He was. It was the institution that brought together the members of the Nandi community. So the Orkoyot, who was at that time known as Koitalel Arab Samoei, was tricked by the colonel of the British and was captured and eventually killed. So that demoralized. It demoralized the warriors. It demoralized the warriors. So the warriors could not mount up an effective attack against the British as they had done under Koitarel, because Koitarel was the spiritual leader and he also led the community in its wars or in its expeditions against the enemies. So these weakened, or it made them to lack direction. The leaders who took over control after the death of Koitalel Arap Samoei could also not match up the organizational skills of Koitalel Arap Samoei. So the death of Koitalel Arap Samoei was, we could conclude that was the final nail to the coffin of the resistance of the Nandi, because they were now unable to effectively fight against the Nandi. So these are some of the reasons that contributed to them being ultimately defeated. And as we mentioned in our last lesson, they were defeated in the year 1905. So now that they have put up a fight, they have fought against the British, and they have finally been defeated. What were the consequences? What were the results of their resistance? So let us take a step further and look at the results. The results of the Nandi resistance. The results of the Nandi resistance. What were the consequences? What were the outcomes of their resistance against the British? Number one, loss of life. Most of the warriors lost their lives as they resisted the British. Remember, the British are using superior weapons, the machine guns and the rifles, the repeater rifles. So these led to most of them losing their lives. It is estimated that thousands of around 1,000 of warriors lost their lives during that period of their resistance. There was a lot of loss of life. Most of their lives were lost during the resistance. And then number two, they lost their land. Loss of land. So the fertile land, the land that was very fertile, that was producing the food they were using, was now taken over by the British. So they lost their land to the British ultimately, because now they have been defeated. They cannot continue to occupy that land. So the British came and took over the land. And while they were taken, or their land was taken up, the Nandi were pushed into reserves. The Nandi were pushed into reserves. Most of them, because now their fertile land has been taken away for the British settlers. The Nandi were now forced to move into the less productive land, and others were even left to become squatters in the land that the British were living in. So that was another consequence. The fourth one is that they lost their prestige. They lost their influence or prestige. They lost their influence. Remember, the Nandi were the expendables in that area at that time. They believed they could not be defeated. But now that the British have come and have finally defeated them, they now lost their influence in the region. They could now not be feared the same way they had been feared before. Let us look at some other results or some other results of the Nandi resistance. So the fifth one, most of the Nandi warriors were conscripted into British service. Now, because of their military skills and their ruthlessness, the British conscripted or forced the Nandi warriors to work as policemen, and also to join into the army. So they were now able to work under the British government, and also they lost their independence. They lost their independence. They lost their independence, and then lastly, they were displaced. They were displaced from their original areas of occupation. So as the British advanced and took over their land, the British or the Nandi people were displaced into other areas. Some of them had to move away from their home. So those are some of the results or the consequences of the Nandi resistance against the British. And now I would give you a revision question as we end our lesson. Remember, we have been discussing the reasons why the Nandi resistance was defeated and the results of their resistance. So revision questions. I'm going to give you 2 questions. And the first question is, discuss the reasons why the Nandi resistance was subdued. And then number 2, explain the consequences of the Nandi resistance against the British. Number 1, discuss the reasons why the Nandi resistance was subdued. And number 2, explain the consequences of the Nandi resistance against the British. And I'm sure those are the very easy questions that we have effectively tackled in our today's lesson. Thank you for having time to study with me. Until the next time we shall meet for a history and government lesson. Bye bye. Hello students, how do you do? I hope you are faring on well with your studies and are enjoying yourself as you continue to learn. Welcome to our today's history and government lesson. We are in Form 2 work, and the topic we have been studying in the few lessons that have passed is the development of industry. And specifically, we had started learning about the effects of industrial revolution, the effects of many industries coming up and operating at the same time. In our last lesson, we were able to learn about the political effects or the political consequences of industrial revolution or industrialization. You can refer to that. You can also use that term, industrialization. What were the political effects of industrialization? Are you able to remember? We learned that in our previous lesson. We discussed several political effects. Among them were that there was increased colonization. There was desire for more colonies. This led to the scramble for and partitioning of Africa. That is one political effect. The other one was the rise of Marxism as an ideology in running of economies. And also there was the rise of trade unions. There was rise of trade unions. And also apart from that, there was also the rise of the middle class, and they rose and were demanding for good governance. And also it also led to the rise of the world wars that we experienced as a world during that time. So that is the First World War and the Second World War. Therefore, my dear learner, in our today's lesson, we are going to take a step further and learn about the economic effects of industrial revolution. In our today's lesson, we are going to learn about the economic effects of industrial revolution. What are the economic effects of development of industries? That is in Europe and other parts of the world. What influence did they bring in the economy? So the first effect or the first result of industrialization, there was improvement. There was improvement in agriculture. There was improvement in agriculture. With development of more industries, farmers were motivated to produce more raw materials. Because the industries have increased in number, that has led to increase in demand of raw materials. These motivated those who are farmers, those who are producing agricultural products, to produce more so that they could meet the demand for raw materials. So agriculture developed because of demand. It led to a demand of raw materials. These encouraged those who are farmers to plant more. If, for example, I'm a farmer, I'm producing cotton, and there are so many industries that want or require cotton, it will force me or it will motivate me to produce more cotton because there is market, there is demand for that cotton. So that impacted or led to the development of agriculture. Apart from that, industries, there were development of new industries that could provide or that could make artificial fertilizer. There were industries that now could produce artificial fertilizer through chemistry or through chemicals. So these fertilizers were cheaper and easier to apply compared to the natural manure. Initially, the farmers were using the manure that they could get from their animals or locally sourced manure. But now with industries, there were industries that developed that could produce artificial fertilizer. So that led to or encouraged people to produce more agricultural produce, because now there was fertilizer that increased their yields, that increased how they could their produce. More products could be produced in a very small area because of the artificial fertilizers that were applied. Apart from that, there are industries that produced machines. Industries produce machines that could be used in the farms. There were plows, there were hoes, there were tractors that now could be produced in the industry that could be used to advance the methods of agriculture. So these made, it led to mechanized agriculture. Initially, agriculture, people could use their hands. They could use animals in the farms. But now with industry, there was production of new machines that allowed or that encouraged more agricultural activity. So that is the first economic effect. It led to improvement in the field of agriculture. That is number one. Number two, or the next economic effect was that there was development in transport. There was development in transport and communication. There was development in transport and communication through the development of industries. There was also development of new technology. There was development of new technology, that is especially in building of roads and rail. The government invested heavily in making new roads or constructing new roads and rail so that they could encourage development of more industries. These roads encouraged or led to more production. Industries could develop where the roads had been built. So there were more improved technology on road. More vehicles were being manufactured in the industries. There were more advanced rails that were more adapted. There was development of even in the air. There were aeroplanes. Even in air, there was air transport that now could be used. There was inventions of aeroplanes. The flying shuttle being the first example of the aeroplane that was invented, and you have already learned that when you were learning about transport and communication as a topic. So the development of industries encouraged the expansion of the automobile industry. These made significant impact in the economies of the world because now people could easily move from one area to the other through the road, rail, air, and even in water. More ships were being created and developing. Apart from that transport, there were also modern means of communication. There was the use of telephone. Telephone was invented. There was also use of telegram and other ways of communication. The use of letters, posting letters. That isn't communication and isn't the way people could communicate. These expanded the economies because now with more communication, there is easy passing of information, right? So because you are able to communicate with people who are far, the farmers could easily communicate with the people who own industries. They could make orders without physically going to the farms. So that led to development in the economy. So apart from transport and communication, the third economic effect was there was development of international trade. There was development of international trade was able to develop. Now, international trade involves trade between countries, between different countries, between different continents. So, with industries producing a lot of goods, remember we said industrialization was marked by mass production of goods. So, these industries had to go and source markets away from their motherlands. So these encouraged international trade. So countries had to make agreements of how to exchange or how to trade with one another. There were countries that could produce raw materials that were needed in other countries and vice versa. So countries were able to make trade arrangements or trade agreements concerning their products. That is international trade. The next economic effect apart from trade, there was development of, number 4, development of banking and insurance institutions. With development of industries, banks started to develop and stabilize. Banks could now offer flexible loan facilities, because for you to start an industry, you need huge amount of capital. And therefore, banks started to compete against one another to finance these industries, because now whenever you invest in an industry, you expect high returns. So there was development of the banking and insurance firms. So banks produced or gave what? Banks gave loans, right? Banks were giving loans, that is were given by banks, while insurance agencies could insure the industries. When you talk of an insurance is where we have started. Let's say I'm an investor. I have decided to start a cloth making industry or a textile industry. So there'll be somebody else, let's say person B, will come and say, I want to insure your business. What is to insure? That is to say, I'll be paying a certain amount of money, maybe every month, that in case that industry is unable to continue to run, for example, in case there is an outbreak of fire, that person B is able to reimburse me all the losses that I'm going to undertake, or the losses that are going to be incurred in that during that fire. In case there is no accident, that means person B will have made a financial gain, because the monies that have been paid or that have been paying monthly, known as premiums, will now become his own money. So that is insurance. So there was development of insurance agencies that wanted to insure the industries and also to insure the workers. They were insuring the industries and the employees or the workers. That is, they ensured the employees against accident. So you'd find that from the salary that an employee is earning, there is a certain amount that is taken to personal accident cover, so that in case of an accident, that employee is able to be catered for. So that was another economic effect of industrialization, banking and insurance. And then number 5, this is a negative effect. There was decline of the cottage industries. These were the initial industries that did not use machines or did not have elaborate machines. So with the development of modern technology and modern machines, these cottage industries declined. That is the use of the pottery and the weaving, the manual use of labor. These industries that were very common at that time began to decline. That is a negative economic effect. And then number 6, which is the second last economic effect, there was accumulation of wealth. Accumulation of wealth. The countries that had many industries, their governments accumulated a lot of wealth. This was through taxation or revenue gotten through taxation. A country would tax industries for running. They would tax the products that are being produced. So these made the governments to be able to get huge amount of wealth. Apart from the government, the investors themselves, those who had started these industries, were able to accumulate huge amounts of wealth. And that's why we have so many billionaires in the world today, because of the industries that they started. And then lastly, there was over exploitation. There was exploitation of natural resources. There was over exploitation of natural resources. That is another negative economic effect, that these industries needed a lot of resources. They needed a lot of metal. They needed a lot of raw materials and minerals that were used as chemicals in those industries. So that led to them or people over exploiting the natural resources. And that is why we have places where the mines were, or the iron was being mined, right? It was left bare. There was huge spaces that were exploited. So this is a negative effect of industrialization, because the industries need these minerals, they need these raw materials, right? For example, the industries that needed wood to run meant that trees could be cut down, and there is no replacement. That has led to negative, or has led to the environment being misused. So those are the economic effects of industrialization.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
How are you? Welcome to our today's lesson, History and Government lesson. We are continuing with the topic international relations. And in our today's lesson, we are going to focus on the performance of the United Nations. In our previous lesson, we learned about the organization of the United Nations. And we said the United Nations is organized. It has 6 principal organs. Are you able to remember them? The organs that help, or that are used, or that are under the United Nations. Are you able to remember them? The 6 organs. You could note them. What are they? We have the General Assembly. We have the Security Council. We also have the Economic and Social Council. We have the International Criminal, International Court of Justice. That is number 4. And then number 5, we have the Secretariat, which we said is headed by who? Who heads the Secretariat? Very good. The Secretary General. And we said the Secretary General is given a 5-year term, and normally they are appointed from the minor powers. And then lastly, the last organ is the Trusteeship Council, which is given the mandate of taking care of, or maintaining the territories that were taken from the Allied powers, that were previously taken care of by the League of Nations, and then the territories that were taken after the Second World War from the Axis powers. So it has various organizations, or it has various duties. Each organ has various duties to make sure that the world or international peace is maintained. Now, we also looked at or learned about the specialist or the specialized agencies of the United Nations and the different activities and duties that they do. Now, in today's lesson, we are going to ask ourselves, how has the UN performed so far as we are today? Because it is an organization that is here even today. What are the achievements that have the UN been able to make? Are there any achievements? And also, are there some problems or challenges that they have been able to face? So in our today's lesson, that is what we should be able. So by my learner, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the achievements or identify the achievements that have been made or the milestones that have been made by the United Nations, and also should be able to discuss the challenges that they are facing. So let us start with the achievements. The achievements of the UN. What are the achievements that the UN has been able to have? So the first one and the most important one is that it has led to disarmament through the security or the work of the Security Council. There has been significant reduction in production and use of arms, and especially those dangerous arms, that is includes the atomic bombs. So there has been strides that have been made by the United Nations to ensure or to see to it that nations are producing less arms that are a threat to humanity. They have also led or encouraged the members to cease from producing weapons of mass destruction. So there is the weapons of mass destructions have been reduced in their production. So that is the biggest achievement that has been able to be gotten by the UN. It has led to disarmament. There is gradual reduction in production of arms. That is the first achievement. And then number two, this next achievement is that it has made significant strides in protection of human rights. It has made significant steps in protection of human rights. The biggest or the one of the biggest part of the United Nations Charter is the Declaration of Human Rights, and the UN has done a lot of work to make sure that nations adhere to the respect of the human rights, the basic human rights and freedoms of humanity have been upheld, such that there is, in case there is any nation that is going against the rights and freedoms of citizens, of one citizen, of one nation or of another country, the UN has made significant strides to see to it that the rights and freedoms of the people are being followed. The actions also of the ICJ, have been significant in trying cases of crimes against humanity. So those people who have been found guilty of crimes against humanity have been taken to the ICJ or the ICC, the court at Hague, and then there has been justice has been brought to the victims of whose rights have been violated. And then number three, it has led or it has made significant strides to result to decolonization. decolonization. Through the work of the UN, there are no longer activities of colonialism. It made it made impact immediately after the Second World War to make sure that each and every country has been able to achieve its independence. Remember, the UN is an association of independent or sovereign states. So it encouraged countries to have their own independence, and it made strides to make sure that those that were under any power at that time, they have been given their own independence, and they are able to make their own decisions and have their own self-respect. That is decolonization. So that is another achievement that has been made by the UN. It has made strides to make sure that countries are able to get their own independence. Number 4, there is a disability mainstreaming. Through the Charter on Human Rights. It has led to equality, or it has made or encouraged members to put in place measures to make sure that those people who are disabled, the disabled people, have access. So it has made, or it has brought to the consciousness of nations that even the disabled people are able to access opportunities just like other people. They are able to get resources that they require. They are able to be exposed to opportunities for them to work, opportunities for them to continue learning, that their disability is not used against them. Their disability is given or is not a shortcoming to them. And then also it has led to development programs. There has been initiation of development programs. Development programs have been instituted. This is through the work of the World Bank. Allow me to write it in full. Through the activities of the World Bank, which has provided loans, right? Has provided loans. Other nations have given grants to other countries to allow them to develop. So there has been significant programs or that have been put in place by the UN through the organs and the specialized agencies to make sure that there is development in the countries, especially after the devastating effects of the World War. So the economy has been able to grow under the world economy has been able to grow and flourish under the UN. Also, apart from development, that is economic, there has also been institution of humanitarian. There has been institution of humanitarian programs. These includes the resettlement of refugees and also cultural interactions between people. So the humanity or people have been able to interact. Different organizations have been brought together to make sure that humanity or people who are facing various problems have been able to be taken care of. Those people who are facing floods, people who are facing famine, they do not have food. through the UN, there are programs that have been instituted to make sure that their needs have been taken care of. So people are able to access basic needs. Basic needs of people through organizations like FAO, that is the Food and Agriculture Organization. People have been able to get food in their countries. Countries that are unable to feed their people have been given programs or have been connected to different programs to enable them get food for their people. Apart from that, there has also been strides that have been made in fighting of diseases that did not have cure, through the work of the World Health Organization, WHO, the World Health Organization. Experts have been brought together and they have made discoveries that have been disseminated, or that knowledge has been passed all across members of the United Nations, and it has found or we have seen that diseases that initially would not be able to be controlled, today they are controlled. For example, we have vaccinations against malaria. We have vaccinations against smallpox. Through these are initiatives of the World Health Organization, together with other partnerships, to see to it that the diseases have been fought away with. And also, the next achievement is that there has been advocating for women rights. Women rights have also been advocated for. So the discrimination against gender has now become a thing of the past. Today, women are allowed to engage in economic, in political, and social functions as equal to the males. There is no further discrimination, though there are some, we have not yet made that 100% achievement, but through the work of UN, we have now, today we are able to talk about women rights, and also we are able to get women taking significant positions. There has also been there has also been steps that have been made against terrorism. The UN, through the Security Council, have made significant strides in deploying military personnel, and also military intelligence, sharing of intelligence amongst countries, which has enabled them, or enabled us through the United Nations, to be able to curb the effect of terrorism. And then there has also been introduction of democracy and good governance. Democracy and good governance. So through the work of the UNHCR, the UN, especially through UNICEF, that is education and sensitization of people, there is now desire and there is development of good democratic systems and also governance. Remember, the biggest aim of UN is to bring international peace. So it has encouraged governments to be democratic. It has encouraged governments to undertake free and fair elections. During elections, the UN sends missions or observers to make sure that the elections that are happening in the different countries or members of the UN are free and fair. This has led to good governance. So apart from these achievements that I've mentioned, they have also had some challenges. They have had some few challenges in how they have taken their duties. So let us look at the challenges facing the UN. Challenges facing the UN. So the first challenge is that there has been, or there are different systems and ideologies. So countries have different political, economic, social systems that are different. They have different ideologies from one another. So when it is so difficult for the UN to bring all these nations to think as one, because every people have their own systems that they believe in, they have different forms of government, they have different ideologies that they believe in. So uniting them has become a very hard or a very has become a challenge on the part of the UN. Another challenge is that of nationalism. Nationalism. So each and every country, we have said they are independent states. So as an independent state, a country is concerned with her own problems. It is concerned with how to develop her people, how to make sure that her people are well. So the nations have divided attention. They do not fully commit themselves to the activities of the UN because they are concentrating on their own, on their own needs. And then number three, they have a challenge in funding. Remember, we said the UN is run by donations or money that is given by members according to their own economic capabilities. So there are some countries that cannot fully support the UN. And even those that are fully supporting the UN, they have their own economies to run. So the UN does not have sufficient funds to run the missions, to run and also to curb the so many problems that are facing the members. And also, number four, there has been a lot of border disputes. There has been a lot of border disputes that have erupted between members, most of which were done during the process of colonization. So after independence, there has been border disputes that have been existing for a very long time, and the UN is unable to actually find a conclusive solution to those border disputes. And also, they do not have a sufficient army. They do not have a standing army to enforce the decisions that are made by the UN. So if one nation decides to go rogue, they do not have an army, a standing army that is controlled by the UN to be able to enforce its decisions. And also, they have there is also another challenge of regional conflicts. There has been regional conflicts that have been happening. Regional conflicts that have been happening. One is in among the Arabs and the Israel. Arabs and Israel. You have heard of Pakistan, right? And Israel. So they are always fighting against each other. There has been these conflicts that have been there, running for a very long time. In Sudan, until the other day, it's when we saw some kind of peace. We saw the Arabs fighting against the southern Sudanese who are dark-skinned. So there has been a lot of issues, a lot of conflicts, regional conflicts that do not seem to have a conclusive solution. Also, there has been competition from other organizations. There has been competition from other organizations where the members have taken pledge or have taken into. An example is the Arab League, right? So this has made the nations to have divided attention. They do not have a specific way of doing they are not directly concentrated on the UN. So they have divided attention. Another one is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, what is known as NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. So this has made countries to not fully commit to the activities of the UN. And also, lastly, but not the least, there are so many that you could discuss. There has been disregard by some nations. Some nations disregard the decisions that have been made by the United Nations. An example is Britain and America when they were invading other countries. They do away, or they do not respect the decisions that have been made by the United Nations. So these are some of the challenges that the UN is facing. So, my dear learner, as we come to the end of our today's lesson, we have been discussing the performance of the United Nations. We have looked at its achievements, and also we have looked at the challenges that the UN faces in discharging its aims or its mandate. So, in our next lesson, we shall make a step further and look at the next international organization, which is the Commonwealth. So, before we end our today's lesson, here is an exercise for you. An exercise for you. Some work for you to do at home. Questions. And the first question is, state and explain the achievements of the United Nations. Number 2, identify the challenges. Identify the challenges faced by the UN, that is the United Nations. Number 1, state and explain the achievements of the United Nations. And then number 2, identify the challenges faced by the United Nations. And with that, my dear learner, we have come to the end of our today's lesson. I've been your teacher, Conan Gakure.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
Hello learners, my name is Stephen Kariongi. Welcome to today's lesson. Our topic of discussion is reproduction in plants and animals, and this is a topic in Form 3 biology. During the last lesson, we went through the chapter objectives and we did a brief introduction of the meaning of reproduction and the types of reproduction. Today, we'll continue with our discussion on the same, and specifically, we are going to look at the importance of reproduction. in this case, we are asking ourselves, what is the importance of reproduction? Why is reproduction necessary? Why is reproduction significant? So it can either be put in those different ways. Now, the first importance is that reproduction is important for procreation. And procreation is the ability of organisms to replace themselves. We know that organisms cannot live forever. With the time, they will die and they need to be replaced. Otherwise, if those organisms are not replaced, then the species may become extinct. And therefore, it is important that there is continuity of species. So we are saying that organisms need to be replaced when they die to ensure continuity. To ensure continuity of species or prevent extinction. Prevent extinction. We have heard of situation whereby some organisms have become extinct from the earth. And once they become extinct, there is no way of getting them back. So the best way to ensure that species do not become extinct is by ensuring that there is reproduction, so that organisms, when they are alive, they can give rise to offspring of their own kind for continuity. Number two, reproduction is also important for quality improvement. Is important for quality improvement. What do I mean by this? Now, you'll find that once organisms have been formed, they are faced with a lot of environmental challenges. And it is important that these organisms become adapted to these environmental challenges so that their survival can continue, so that the survival is not compromised. In this case, what happens is that reproduction ensures that there is mixing of genetic material. There is mixing of genes between different organisms of the same species to ensure that there are variations, there are new varieties being made. And those variations enhance adaptability. They ensure that the new organisms that are created, they are more adapted than their parents, or than their parents. So basically, we are saying that they need to be of better quality, so that maybe if it is the resistance to diseases, they become more resistant. Yeah. If it's in terms of exploitation of different habitats, they are better placed than their parents. So in this case, we are saying that quality improvement occurs through mixing of genes, or through mixing of genetic material, which brings about variation. And then we can say that variation leads to adaptability, to environmental conditions. So basically, those are two importance of reproduction. Now, from here, we want to understand that the basis or the foundation of reproduction lies in cell division. For organisms to reproduce, their cells must be able to divide and therefore increase in number. So in this case, we are going to mention here that cell division is the basis of reproduction. And therefore, we cannot understand reproduction if we do not understand cell division. So we are going to look at cell division. Now, the term cell division, just as it states, there is a cell involved and there is division that is involved. And when these cells reach maturity, they divide into what we call the daughter cells. Daughter cells are the offspring of the mature cells. And this division leads to an increase in the number of cells. So when the number of cells increase, basically we are saying that the population also is increasing. So we can say that cell division, this is the multiplication of the cells. And it happens that mature cells divide into daughter cells, which later mature and continue dividing. So in other words, we are saying that cell division is a continuous process. So the mature cells divide. They form the daughter cells. Then those daughter cells, later with the time, they will mature and also they'll continue with the division. So in the process is a continuous process that leads to the multiplication of the cells. It's a continuous process that leads to multiplication of the cells. Now, from here, I want us to look at the types of cell division. One of the objectives of this chapter is to understand the two types of cell division and also to be able to describe them. Now, we have two types of cell division, and the first one is mitosis and the second one is meiosis. So we are going to look at the two in more details, starting with mitosis. Now, when we talk of mitosis, we say that is the type of cell division whereby the daughter cells, that is the cells that have been formed, have the same number of chromosomes as their parent cell. We shall look at what is a chromosome. Or you can say is whereby the daughter cells have the same genetic material as the parent cell. So, you can say that this is the type of cell division let's have an example. For example, if the parent cell has 4 pairs of chromosomes, then the daughter cell should also have 4 pairs of chromosomes. That means that the daughter cell has the same genetic material as the parent cell. Also has 4 pairs. Now, where does this type of cell division occur? This type of cell division occurs in body cells, what we call somatic cells. All the other body cells except the gametes. The cells of the skin, the cells of the liver, right? The cells of the lungs, every part of our body except the gametes. So we have the type of cell division that occurs there being mitosis. And it's the one that brings about growth and development. Now, so we can say that it occurs in somatic cells. That is body cells, except the gametes. It doesn't occur in gametes. Now, this type of cell division also occurs in stages. And we are going to look at those stages. We are going to look at the stages of mitosis as our first type of cell division. Now, there are about 5 stages that are involved, and those stages need to follow each other in a certain order. Now, the first stage, we refer to it as the interphase. Second stage, we have prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and finally telophase. So those are the 5 stages of mitosis: interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. So we are going to look at what happens in each one of these stages, but for now we are going to stop there and have a short assignment based on what we have learned. So the first question in our assignment for today: state and explain the importance of reproduction. Number 2, define the term cell division. Number 3, name the 2 types of cell division. And finally, name the 5 stages of mitosis. So we are going to stop there until the next lesson. See you then.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
How are you, Anna? Welcome to our today's lesson. I'm your teacher, Conan Gakure. We are continuing with our learning on the establishment of colonial administration in Kenya, or colonial rule in Kenya. And in the previous lessons, we have been studying the response of the Kenyan people to the coming of the British occupation of Kenya, and we discovered that the people reacted in 3 ways. They either resisted, or they collaborated, or they had mixed reactions. So we had started with the first response, which is resistance. We have already covered 1, community that resisted against or resisted the British occupation of the Kenyan territory, that is the Nandi. We were able to learn the causes of the Nandi resistance, how they resisted the British rule, and the reasons why they were able to put up a very long resistance. They resisted the British for a period of 10 years. That was a very long time resisting. Every now and then the British could send expeditions against them, but these expeditions could not be able to outmaneuver the Nandi. And we also studied the reasons why they were eventually defeated, the factors that contributed to them being defeated, and also finally we were able to learn about the reasons or the results or consequences of their resistance against the British. So that is the first community that resisted the colonial administration in Kenya. So today we are going to move further and look at the second resistance, that is the Agiriama resistance. The Agiriama resistance, that is the second group that we are going to study in our lesson today. In our lesson today, we are going to look at the cause of their resistance, how they resisted the British rule, and also learn about the reasons why they resisted the British rule. So, the Agiriama resistance, this is the Agiriama community is part or is a community among the coastal Bantus. They are part of the Mijikenda. So they are found in the coastal part of the Kenyan territory. So if you could get your atlases and be able to locate on your map the map on the people of Kenya, you are going to locate the Agiriama people in the coastal part, in the southern part of the Kenyan nation. So this is part of the coastal Bantus, and they had settled in this place earlier, even before the coming of the British. So in their lives, they were farmers. They were traditionally farmers. They engaged in farming. So they had fertile land that they engaged in. So they could produce products that they sold to the coastal communities, the communities that were living along the coast. And with the coming of the Arabs, they could also sell them to the Arabs. Apart from that, they also engaged in trading. They engaged in long distance trade that had been established during the 19th century with the coming of the Arabs. So they were an essential part. They acted as middlemen. So they were a contact between the interior communities, that is the Akamba, who are also selling goods from the most interior parts of Kenya, and also the Arabs at the coast. So they were middlemen at that time. They could exchange their products for other products. So they could also sell them in exchange of currencies that had now developed. So they were trade was a very important part of their livelihood. But now, with the coming of the British established plantations. They came and established plantations at the coast. The British came, talking of the British, came and established plantation. They were planting cotton and rubber at the coast. So they established large plantations of cotton and rubber. And the only way they could be able to plant or be able to develop these plants was through the use of agriama, providing them with labor. So the resistance of the agriama started with them refusing to work in the British plantations. That is how the resistance started. The British, after they had come and were establishing the cotton and rubber farms, they conscripted or they forced the Agriama people to work in the plantations. So the Agriama decided to refuse. They resisted working. They resisted to provide their labor in the British plantation. So that is how the resistance of the Agriama started. So with that, the British opted to force them by imposing taxes. So they imposed a tax of a tax on the people to make sure, and the tax was supposed to be paid in cash. And the way they could get that cash is from working in the plantation. So when the British saw that when they are asking the Agriama to work in their plantation, they have resisted, they resorted to imposing taxation on the Agriama people so that they could be forced to work in the plantation so that they could be able to raise the cash required for the taxation. So with the taxation, the Agriama also refused even to continue working. In turn, they opted to continue with their trading activities so that they can raise the cash to pay for the taxation. This angered the British because no matter what they are trying to do against the Agriama, they are continuing to resist and refuse to work in the plantations. So the Agriama defied every manner of order that was given by the British. So that angered the British so much until one of the colonial leaders, who was known as Hobley, who was the provincial commissioner at the time, came to see or visited the area of the Agriama because of how the Agriama had resisted and refused totally to follow all the orders that they were given by their leaders. So when he came, the Agriama tried to raise their grievances to the British provincial commissioner. But the PC at that time, as he was abbreviated, the PC, the provincial commissioner, refused to listen to their grievances. So the people resorted to totally refuse to cooperate with the British. They were led by two significant leaders. Remember, the people who were bringing the grievances of the people to the commissioner were these two leaders. One was a lady who was known as Mekatilili wa Menza. That was one of the leaders. And also there was one also known as Wanje wa Madorika. Wanje wa Madorika. So this one was a woman that was very influential in the community. So she led the community together with Wanje wa Madorika to present the grievances of the Agriama people to the provincial commissioner. But they decided, the PC decided to refuse their grievances or to listen to their grievances and told them they had to provide the labor in the plantations. So what did they do? Mekatili Wamenza, together with Wanje, together with the other leaders, rallied all the Giriama people away from those plantations. Some of them even moved further into inland, away from the plantations, trying to run away from the British. while others, they were rallied them to the kaya. They rallied them to the kaya. Remember, the Agriama people were organized among kayas. Those are clans or kayas that are related families. So the Mekatilili wa Menza, together with the other leaders, rallied all the people to the kaya, which was known as kaya fungo. Was known as kaya fungo. This was a shrine that was believed by the Agriama people. So these people moved, or the leaders marshaled all the people to this kaya, where they could come and sit down so that they could chart the way forward. So when they came to the shrine, the people raised the different clans raised their grievances to these leaders, and they discovered that they have the same problems. They are being evicted from their lands to pave way for the plantations, and also they are being forced to work in those plantations. Another grievance that they were having, the tax had been imposed on them. So what that did at the Kayafungo, they decided to get oath. They decided to take oaths. An oath. They decided to take oath that bound them together. So they decided to take oaths that bound them together. They took allegiance. An oath is an allegiance. So if you take an oath, you have decided with the whole of your being that you are going to do a specific thing. So there are two kinds of oaths that were taken. One was referred to as mukushe. Kushe. So this was made by the men. This was for the men. And the other one was known as fusi. This was for the women. So when the people went to the Kayafungo, that is their shrine, that was very essential, and it had very strong religious impacts on them. So they made an oath of binding them together. So the men took the kushe oath, while the women took the fusi oath. These bound them together, and they vowed not to bow down or not to be intimidated by the British. So they decided to come together and revolt, totally revolt against the British. So they refused even to be paying the taxes. Remember, during this time, they were engaging in trade so that they could pay the taxation. So after the oath, they now totally refused. We are not going to pay even the taxes that you are telling us to pay, and they totally revolted against the British. So after the oath and the total resistance by the people, the British decided to capture these two leaders. So the leaders were captured. The leaders were captured. That is Mekatilili and Wanje. They were captured by the British, and they were leaders were captured and deported to Kisii. So you can imagine, from the coast, they were taken all the way to Kisii. Kisii is in western part of Kenya. So this was in an effort to scuttle the resistance. So the British tried by taking away the leaders, that is Mekatilili, who was a very strong lady that was bringing the people together, and Wanje. So they tried to take them away. By deporting them, they thought that they could now make sure that the resistance did not take place. But to their amazement is that the leaders who had been left, or the people, continued to resist and fight against the British. Even after they had been deported, the British commanded the community to move from their traditional kaya, that is Kayafungo, and move to another kaya. But the people refused. they refused to move and now resorted to armed resistance against them. So, but the British now resorted to them using the scorched earth policy in an effort to weaken or to bring the people to their knees. The scorched earth policy, so they could invade the communities, they could burn down the huts, the homesteads. Remember, as you learned in your Form 1 work, the Agriama were living in homesteads. They could have one family having all their houses together. So the British could come and destroy those houses. They even burnt down the the Kaya Fungo, which was a very essential shrine in the lives of the Agriama. So these further fueled, instead of demoralizing the people, it further fueled them to resist against the British. But now, with that, the British had superior weapons. So though they were fighting, though the Agriama people were trying to resist and fight against the British, they were eventually subdued because of the reinforcements that the British got, because of the strength of the weapons that the British got together with the scorched earth policy. Because when the homesteads were being burnt, the people did not have a place where they could live. So they were eventually defeated, and their resistance was brought to an end. But even as it was brought to an end, there was an agreement that was made. The taxation that has been put on them was lifted or was relaxed even after they had fought against the British. So in a nutshell, that is how the Agiriama resisted the British colonial rule. That is how the Agriama resisted the British colonial rule. So that is how the Agriama fought or resisted the colonial rule. I've mentioned they started as a resistance, just refusing to provide their labor. And then further on, it went to armed resistance, led by Mekatilili Wamenza, together with this was a very essential woman in the resistance, together with Wanje wa Madorika, right? So even during traditional societies, something that I just need to mention here is that women were also essential in fighting for the independence or fighting for the independence of the African communities, and especially Kenya. We see one person who is a woman fighting against the British. So women also have had their positions to lead. They have had an influence in the society. So that is women also have their position even in our modern society. So they need to be accorded the same respect just as the men, because you can imagine this is a woman that has stood and leading the whole community to fight against the British involvement in their activities. So as we end our lesson today, we have been looking at the cause of the Agriama resistance, how their resistance took place and how it continued. So we said eventually here they were defeated because of the strong weapons that the British had. So as we end our lesson today, here is a revision question. Revision questions, and the questions are: number 1, identify the leaders that led the Agriama resistance. That is number 1. And then number 2, describe the Agriama resistance. The first question, identify the leaders that led the Agriama resistance. That is 1. And then number 2, describe the Agriama resistance. Describe the Agriama resistance. And that marks the end of our history and government lesson for today. Until our next lesson, bye-bye.
Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
Hello, learner. Welcome to our manifested online learning. We are going to have a lesson in history and government. We are studying the topic European invasion of Africa and the process of colonization. That is the topic that we have been studying. It's a Form 3 topic, the first topic of Form 3 work. We have been looking at studying the subtopic, the African reaction to European colonization. We said the Africans reacted to the process of colonization in 2 ways. The first way was what, my dear Lana? What did we say were the reactions of the Africans? Very good. Resistance, and then collaboration. So we are continuing with our series on the collaboration. I said we are going to look at 2 communities in Africa that collaborated with the European powers. That is the Baganda, who are in East Africa, and also the Lozi, who are found in Southern Africa. So in our previous lesson, my dear learner, we looked at the terms that were made by the Buganda during the Buganda Agreement that was made in 1900, and we said it was made between the British and the Baganda people. Each had representatives, and they made elaborate terms explaining their relationship. We divided those terms into terms concerning the boundary, terms concerning the government, terms concerning the economy or the